My name is Angela Brooks, and 3 days after I buried my father, my husband looked me in the eyes and told me he didn't love me anymore. Not during a fight, not after years of screaming and cheating and chaos. No, he waited until I was broken, until I was grieving, until I had just watched the only parent I had left lowered into the ground. Then he decided to destroy what was left of me. But what Brian didn't know was that my father had already seen through him long before I did. And my daddy made sure that even from the grave, he would protect me one last time. My father's name was Robert Mitchell. To most people in Birmingham, Alabama, he was just Robert, the tall man with rough hands and steel-toed boots. The man who fixed cars for free when single mothers couldn't afford mechanics. The man who worked double shifts his entire life and still somehow found time to help neighbors move furniture on weekends. But to me, he was everything. My mother died when I was 6 years old. A drunk driver crossed the center line on Highway 31 and changed my entire life in one night. After that, it was just me and Daddy. And that man loved me with every piece of his soul. He packed my lunches every morning, even though he could barely cook. Burned pancakes almost every Sunday for years because he was determined to give me real breakfasts. Sat through dance recitals and school plays surrounded by mothers while pretending not to notice he was the only father there alone. He used to braid my hair before school. Badly. Or terribly. I'd walk into class looking like I lost a fight with a hairbrush. But he tried. That's what mattered. Daddy worked construction during the day and repaired engines at night in a small garage behind our house. I used to sit on an old stool while he worked, listening to gospel music on a dusty radio while grease stained his hands black. Baby girl, he'd say, tightening bolts under a truck hood. Never trust people who love money more than they love people. At the time, I thought it was just one of his old-fashioned sayings. I didn't realize he was trying to prepare me for my future. For Brian. I met Brian Brooks when I was 27 years old. He was handsome in a polished kind of way. Clean suits, white smile, smooth voice. The kind of man who could walk into a room and make everybody like him within 5 minutes. He worked in pharmaceutical sales and drove a silver BMW that smelled expensive inside. When he first asked me out, Daddy hated him immediately. Not openly. Daddy was too respectful for that. But I noticed things. The long silences after Brian left. The way Daddy watched him carefully during dinners. The little questions he'd ask afterward. Do you trust him? You know what kind of man he is? Are you happy for real? And every time I'd laugh and tell him he was being overprotective. Because back then, I thought love meant defending your partner against everybody else, even the people trying to protect you. Brian and I got married after 2 years of dating. At first, life felt beautiful. We bought a modest little house in a quiet neighborhood. I continued teaching third grade at Jefferson Elementary. Brian kept climbing higher at work. For a while, I thought we were building something solid. But around year 6, something started changing, or maybe revealing itself. Brian became obsessed with appearances. Obsessed. He started criticizing everything around us. Our house wasn't big enough. My car looked cheap. My teacher's salary embarrassed him. Daddy's old pickup truck made us look poor. One night, while driving through Mountain Brook, Brian pointed at a giant mansion sitting behind iron gates. That's the kind of house successful people live in, he said. I laughed softly. Who needs all that space? Brian glanced at me with irritation. People with ambition. That sentence stayed with me because it wasn't really about the house. It was about how he saw people. Everything became about status after that. Money, labels, impressing people. Meanwhile, Daddy stayed exactly the same, simple, grounded, generous. And Brian hated that. He especially hated that Daddy never seemed impressed by wealth. One Thanksgiving, about 5 years before Daddy died, Brian drank too much wine and started asking questions at the dinner table. "So, Robert," he said casually, cutting into turkey, "that land you own outside the city is probably worth a fortune now, huh?" Daddy shrugged. "Maybe." "Have you ever thought about selling?" "Nope." Brian laughed. "Man, if I had property like that, I'd cash out immediately." Daddy took a slow sip of sweet tea before answering. "Money ain't useful if it changes who you are." Brian smiled politely, but I saw something cold flash across his face for half a second. Later that night, after Brian went upstairs, Daddy sat quietly in the kitchen, staring into his coffee. "You okay?" I asked. He looked at me for a long moment. "You happy, baby girl?" I smiled immediately. Of course. But Daddy didn't smile back. He just nodded slowly, like a man confirming a suspicion he wished wasn't true. 3 months before he died, Daddy collapsed at work. Heart failure. Years of labor had finally caught up to him. The doctors said his heart was severely damaged and there wasn't much they could do besides medication and monitoring. I still remember sitting beside his hospital bed while machines beeped softly around us. "Sorry, baby girl," he whispered weakly. "Guess this old engine finally gave out." I grabbed his hand and started crying immediately. He squeezed my fingers gently. "Don't do that," he said softly. "I need you strong." I took leave from work and moved into Daddy's house to care for him full time. Brian hated it. At first, he pretended to understand. Then the complaints started. "You're never home. You barely answer your phone. You're neglecting your marriage." One night, after Daddy had fallen asleep, Brian cornered me in the kitchen. "This can't be your entire life now, Angela. My father is dying." Brian exhaled sharply like I was frustrating him. "Everybody dies eventually." The words hit me like ice water. I stared at him. "You don't mean that." "I'm just saying you can't put everything on hold forever." Everything. That's how he described taking care of my dying father. Like it was an inconvenience. Like love had an expiration date. That night, after Brian left, Daddy called my name weakly from the bedroom. I sat beside him while rain tapped softly against the windows. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. Fragile. But his eyes were still sharp. "Baby girl," he whispered, "promise me something." "Anything." "When I'm gone, don't let loneliness make decisions for you." I frowned. What does that mean? He shook his head slowly. Then he said something strange. "When the lawyer calls, listen carefully before you trust anybody, especially people who suddenly start acting differently." I remember laughing nervously. "Daddy, what are you talking about?" But he only squeezed my hand weakly. A man shows who he really is when he thinks something valuable is within reach. At the time, I thought the medication was making him paranoid. I had no idea he was trying to warn me. Daddy died on a Thursday morning at exactly 5:17 a.m. I was holding his hand. The room was quiet except for the oxygen machine slowing down beside him. His final words to me were barely a whisper. "Stand tall, baby girl." Then he was gone. Brian wasn't there. He said he had an important client meeting he couldn't miss. I told myself not to judge him for it. But deep down, something cracked inside me that morning. And 3 days later, that crack shattered completely. My father's funeral was held that Monday morning at New Hope Baptist Church, the same church I'd been attending since I was a little girl with crooked braids and scabbed knees. Daddy used to sit on the third pew from the front every Sunday morning wearing pressed button-down shirts and work boots polished so carefully you'd think they cost hundreds of dollars. He believed showing respect didn't require wealth, just effort. The church was overflowing that day. Construction workers in dusty boots, old women from the choir wiping tears with tissues, men from Daddy's old job standing quietly in the back with their hats in their hands. I heard story after story about my father, how he fixed a widow's roof for free after a storm, how he secretly paid somebody's electric bill, how he gave jobs to teenagers nobody else would hire. One man cried while telling me, "Your daddy saved my life after my divorce." I was sleeping in my truck. Robert gave me work and never judged me. I stood there overwhelmed by the realization that my father had quietly become the backbones of so many people's lives. And somehow, I never fully understood the size of his heart until he was gone. Brian stood beside me through all of it. Perfect posture, perfect sympathy, perfect husband. He hugged people, shook hands, said all the right things. Robert was one of the greatest men I ever knew. He treated me like family. He'll be deeply missed. Anybody watching would have thought Brian was grieving deeply. But I noticed something strange. Every time somebody mentioned Daddy's land or property or savings, Brian paid attention differently, sharply, like a dog hearing a can opener from another room. At one point after the burial, Daddy's old friend Earl came over and hugged me tightly. "Your daddy built real wealth, Angela," he said proudly. "Not flashy wealth, real wealth. Smart man." I felt Brian stiffen beside me instantly. "What do you mean?" Brian asked too quickly. Earl smiled. "Robert invested in land before Birmingham started expanding in this direction." The man knew exactly what he was doing. Brian's eyes flickered. That look lasted less than a second, but I saw it. Greed. Pure greed. Later that afternoon, the church fellowship hall filled with casseroles, sweet tea, and exhausted mourners. I sat quietly at a table, barely able to eat. Grief does strange things to your body. You feel hollow and heavy at the same time. People kept hugging me, praying for me, telling me Daddy would always be watching over me. Meanwhile, Brian disappeared for almost 20 minutes. When I finally found him, he was standing outside near the parking lot, talking to Daddy's cousin Marvin. The moment I approached, the conversation stopped. Too fast. Brian smiled awkwardly. "Hey, baby." Marvin looked uncomfortable. "What were y'all talking about?" I asked. "Nothing important," Brian said immediately. Marvin avoided my eyes. Something about that moment unsettled me deeply. That night, after everyone left, the silence inside our house felt unbearable. I changed into one of Daddy's old flannel shirts and curled up on the couch holding one of his faded work jackets against my chest. It still smelled like motor oil and cedar soap. For the first time since he died, I completely broke apart. Not polite tears, not controlled grief. Real grief, ugly grief. The kind that leaves you gasping for breath on the floor. Brian came downstairs halfway through my breakdown. He stood there watching me for a moment before speaking. You should probably try to sleep. I looked up at him through tears. My father is dead. I know, but his voice sounded empty, flat, like he was discussing the weather. Then he sat down across from me and rubbed his hands together slowly. So, did your dad ever mention updating his will? I stared at him. I honestly thought I misheard him.
What?
The will, he repeated carefully. Did he ever say what he planned to do with everything? Everything. Not, how are you holding up? Not, what do you need? Not, I miss him too. Everything. I felt something cold move through my chest. Brian, I whispered, my father was buried today. I'm just asking because these legal situations can get complicated. I stood up immediately. I can't talk to you right now. He looked irritated instantly. Why are you acting like I'm doing something wrong? I walked upstairs without answering. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daddy in that hospital bed telling me, a man shows who he really is when he thinks something valuable is within reach. At around 2 in the morning, I woke up and realized Brian wasn't beside me. I went downstairs quietly. The kitchen light was on. Brian sat at the table with his laptop open, typing quickly. The second he noticed me, he snapped the screen shut, too fast. What are you doing? I asked. Nothing. Brian. He sighed dramatically. I couldn't sleep. But before he closed the laptop, I saw enough. Search results, inheritance laws, probate timelines, spousal property rights. My stomach dropped. You're researching my father's money? Brian stood up immediately. Don't start this. Start what? You're emotional right now. Emotional. That word made me furious. Of course I'm emotional. My father just died. Brian rubbed his face in frustration. I'm trying to think ahead because somebody has to. That sentence sat in my chest like poison. Somebody has to. As if grief itself was inconvenient to him. As if mourning my father made me irresponsible. I went back upstairs and locked the bedroom door. For the first time in 14 years of marriage, I didn't want my husband near me. The next morning, Brian acted perfectly normal. Too normal. He made coffee, asked if I wanted breakfast, kissed my forehead before leaving for work. It felt rehearsed. That afternoon, my best friend Denise came over to check on me. We'd known each other since college. Denise had always seen through people faster than I did. After sitting quietly with me for almost an hour, she finally asked, what's going on with Brian? I blinked. What do you mean? That man's acting weird. I tried defending him automatically. He's stressed. Denise gave me a look. No, Angie, he's calculating. That word hit me hard because it was exactly what Daddy had once called Brian after a family barbecue years ago. Calculating. At the time, I'd gotten angry at Daddy for saying it. Now the memory made my stomach twist. Denise leaned closer. Listened to me carefully. Grief reveals people. Some people become softer. Some become selfish. Pay attention to which one your husband becomes. I wanted to dismiss her, but deep down, I already knew. That evening, Brian came home carrying flowers and takeout from my favorite restaurant. Anybody else would have thought it was sweet, but now every gesture felt strategic, like he was investing into something, buying goodwill. During dinner, he casually brought up finances again. He said between bites, if your dad left you anything substantial, we should probably start planning carefully. We, again. I set my fork down slowly. Why are you so focused on my father's money? Brian looked offended immediately. I'm your husband. No, I said quietly. You're acting like an accountant. His jaw tightened. You know what? Forget it. The rest of dinner passed in silence. 2 days later, Brian came home early from work. I knew something was wrong immediately. His face looked strangely calm, like somebody who had rehearsed a difficult conversation in the mirror. He sat across from me in the living room and folded his hands together. I've been thinking a lot, he said. My chest tightened instantly. And he inhaled deeply. I think we need a separation. For a second, I genuinely couldn't process the words. A what? A separation. I stared at him in disbelief. My father died 4 days ago. I know the timing isn't ideal. Not ideal. Like he was rescheduling a business meeting. You're leaving me right after my father died? Brian looked annoyed now. Angela, this marriage hasn't been working for a long time. No, you haven't been working for a long time. That's unfair. I stood up shaking. You waited until I was grieving to do this. I've been unhappy for years. Then why now? He hesitated, just long enough. And in that tiny pause, I understood everything. The inheritance, the will, the money. He thought something valuable was coming. And suddenly, every fake smile, every rehearsed act of kindness, every conversation about our future made horrifying sense. Brian stood up too. I can't keep pretending anymore. Pretending. The word echoed through me like a gunshot. Pretending to love me, pretending to care, pretending to be my husband. I felt physically sick, and somewhere deep inside me, I heard my father's voice again. A man shows who he really is when he thinks something valuable is within reach. Daddy knew. God help me. My father knew the entire time. I didn't cry after Brian told me he wanted a separation. That was the strange part. You'd think after 14 years of marriage, after building a life with someone, sharing those words would completely destroy me. But I think part of me had already started grieving the marriage before he even said it out loud. Because deep down, somewhere beneath all the denial and excuses and loyalty, I already knew something was terribly wrong. Still, that night felt unbearable. Ryan slept in the guest room. I lay awake alone in our bedroom, staring at the ceiling while rain tapped softly against the windows. Everything felt broken. My father was gone. My marriage was collapsing. And somehow both losses were tangled together so tightly I couldn't separate the pain anymore. Around 3 in the morning, I got out of bed and wandered downstairs. Daddy used to say grief makes people restless because love has nowhere to go. I understand that now. I stood in the kitchen clutching one of Daddy's old coffee mugs while memories hit me in waves, teaching me to drive in empty parking lots, dancing badly with me in the living room after report cards, telling me I deserved a man who made life feel peaceful, not heavy. Peaceful. That word haunted me because my marriage hadn't felt peaceful in years. I heard footsteps behind me. Brian. He stopped in the doorway, looking annoyed to find me awake. You okay? Such a stupid question. No, I whispered. I'm not okay. He rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. We should probably keep things civil while we figure this out. Civil. like we were coworkers ending a business partnership. I stared at him. When exactly did you stop loving me? Brian looked uncomfortable immediately. It wasn't sudden. That's not what I asked. He sighed heavily. Angela, people change. No, I said quietly. People reveal themselves. For the first time since our conversation started, Brian looked genuinely irritated. You want to know the truth? My stomach tightened. Yes. He crossed his arms. I got tired of feeling stuck. Stuck in this life, in this town, in this. He gestured vaguely around the kitchen. Smallness. I felt like he'd slapped me. Smallness. This house, my teaching career, my father's life, everything I came from. Brian looked away before continuing. I wanted more out of life than this. I stared at him for a long moment. Then I asked the question I was terrified to ask. Is this about my father's money? His eyes snapped back to mine instantly. Too fast. Why would you even say that? Because my father dies and suddenly you want a separation. Brian laughed bitterly. You really think I'm after your inheritance? Inheritance. The word sounded ugly in the room. I don't know what to think anymore. Brian shook his head dramatically. You know what your problem is? You always see yourself as the victim. That sentence stunned me into silence. Victim. As if grieving my father and losing my marriage in the same week somehow made me manipulative. He walked back upstairs without another word, and for the first time in 14 years, I felt absolutely nothing watching him leave. The next morning, my father's attorney called. Ms. Brooks, this is Charles Whitmore. Your father instructed me to contact you immediately after the funeral arrangements concluded. His voice was calm and professional, older with a slight southern drawl. We need to discuss your father's estate. My stomach tightened instantly. Okay. Can you come to my office this afternoon? I almost said no. The idea of discussing legal paperwork while my father still felt alive in my memories made me sick. But then I remembered Daddy's words. When the lawyer calls, listen carefully before you trust anybody. So I agreed. Charles Whitmore's office sat in one of the oldest buildings downtown. Dark wood floors, tall windows, walls lined with law books that looked older than I was. The receptionist greeted me softly and led me into a large office that smelled faintly like coffee and leather. Mr. Whitmore stood the moment I entered. He looked to be in his late 60s, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. The second he saw me, his expression softened completely. Oh, Angela. He hugged me before I could even speak. And somehow, that simple kindness shattered me more than anything else had. I started crying immediately. Not polite tears, real tears. The kind you can't stop once they begin. Mr. Whitmore guided me into a chair and quietly handed me tissues while I tried pulling myself together. Your father was one of the finest men I've ever known, he said gently. I hope you understand that. I nodded through tears. He talked about you constantly. That made me cry even harder, because suddenly I could picture Daddy sitting in this exact office, talking proudly about me while planning things I knew nothing about. After a few moments, Mr. Whitmore's expression shifted slightly, more serious now. Before we begin, he said carefully, I need to ask you something important. I wiped my face. Okay. Has your husband mentioned your father's estate? My stomach dropped instantly. Yes. Mr. Whitmore leaned back slowly. I suspected he would. The room suddenly felt colder. What does that mean? Instead of answering immediately, he opened a thick folder sitting on his desk. Angela, he said carefully, your father updated his will approximately 11 months ago. I frowned. But he wasn't sick then. No, Mr. Whitmore agreed quietly. He wasn't. Something about the way he said it made my pulse quicken. He came to me because he wanted to ensure you were protected. Protected. The word echoed strangely in my chest. Mr. Whitmore slid several documents onto the desk between us. Your father left you everything. I blinked. What? His home, his retirement accounts, his land holdings, his investment portfolio, his savings, everything. I stared at him in disbelief. My father wasn't wealthy. Mr. Whitmore gave me a sad smile. Your father was extremely wealthy, Angela. He simply didn't live like it. I felt dizzy. How much? He looked down briefly at the paperwork before answering. The total estimated value of the estate is approximately $3.8 million. The world stopped. I actually laughed from shock. No, no, that can't be right. It is. I stared at the papers, unable to breathe properly. My father, a millionaire? The man who still wore 15-year-old jackets? Who fixed his own appliances instead of replacing them? Who drove the same truck for almost 2 decades? Mr. Whitmore folded his hands calmly. Your father invested very wisely for many years. Land, mutual funds, long-term accounts. He lived modestly by choice, not necessity. Tears filled my eyes again instantly. Daddy had worked himself nearly to death while quietly building security for me the entire time. My voice shook. Brian says inheritance becomes marital property. The second I said Brian's name, something changed in Mr. Whitmore's expression. Not anger, recognition. Like he'd expected this exact moment. That, he said carefully, is what your husband believes. A strange chill moved through my body. What does that mean? Mr. Whitmore opened another folder slowly. Inside was a stack of legal documents, thicker than the others. Angela, he said softly, your father made certain that no one except you would ever have access to his estate. I frowned. I don't understand. He slid the top document toward me. The title read, Irrevocable Inheritance Protection Trust. My hands started shaking before I even understood why. And then Mr. Whitmore said the sentence that changed everything. Your father believed your husband might try to leave you after his death. I stared at the trust document so long the words started blurring together. Irrevocable. Separate property. Sole beneficiary. Protected assets. Legal language filled page after page, but only one sentence truly mattered. Brian could not touch a single penny. Not now. Not during divorce. Not ever. My hands trembled against the paper. He knew, I whispered. It wasn't really a question. Mr. Whitmore removed his glasses slowly and rubbed the bridge of his nose before answering. Your father hoped he was wrong, he said quietly. But yes, he had concerns. I looked down at the documents again. Daddy had spent months preparing this, planning this, protecting me, even while dying. Tears slipped down my face silently. What exactly did he say about Brian? Mr. Whitmore hesitated carefully. Your father never accused your husband of anything directly. Robert was too thoughtful for that. But about a year ago, he came to my office and asked very specific questions about inheritance protection. I swallowed hard. What kind of questions? How to ensure assets stayed solely in your possession after his death? How to prevent spousal access during divorce proceedings? How to structure a trust so aggressively that it couldn't be challenged later? My chest tightened painfully. He really thought Brian would leave me? Mr. Whitmore gave me a sad look. I think your father believed Brian's behavior would change the moment money entered the picture. The room fell silent, and suddenly memories started flooding back. All the little moments I ignored. Brian criticizing Daddy's old truck. Brian constantly asks about property values. Brian rolled his eyes whenever Daddy talked about modest living. Brian becoming colder every year our finances stayed average. Daddy had seen all of it, while I kept making excuses. He trusted you so much, Mr. Whitmore said softly. That's why this hurt him. That sentence shattered me, because suddenly I realized Daddy hadn't just been protecting money. He'd been protecting my future, my dignity, my heart. Mr. Whitmore reached into the folder again and pulled out a sealed envelope. My breath caught immediately. I recognized Daddy's handwriting before he even slid it toward me. For my Angela. My vision blurred instantly. He asked me to give this to you only after explaining the trust, Mr. Whitmore said gently. He said it would make sense afterward. My fingers shook as I opened the envelope. Inside was a folded letter written in Daddy's uneven handwriting. I could almost hear his voice before I even started reading. My baby girl, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. And if I know people the way I think I do, Brian has already shown you exactly who he really is. I broke immediately. A sob escaped my throat so suddenly I had to cover my mouth. Mr. Whitmore quietly looked away to give me privacy while I kept reading. First, I need you to understand something clearly. None of this is your fault. You loved your husband the way good people love, fully, faithfully, without keeping score. There is no shame in loving somebody honestly. Tears dripped onto the paper. Because those were exactly the words I needed to hear. Not weak, not stupid, not naive, just loving. I kept reading. I started noticing changes in Brian years ago. The way he talked about money, the way he looked at successful people, the resentment he carried towards simple things. A man who can't appreciate peace will eventually destroy it chasing something else. I closed my eyes tightly. God, Daddy really did see everything. I prayed I was wrong about him. I prayed he'd grow into the man you deserved. But a father knows when somebody looks at his daughter like opportunity instead of treasure. Opportunity instead of treasure. The words hit me like lightning, because that was exactly what it felt like now. Like Brian saw me as access, as an advancement, as a stepping stone towards something bigger. Not a wife, not a partner, an opportunity. I wiped my eyes and kept reading. If Brian leaves when you need him most, then he was never truly standing beside you in the first place. Real love stays. Real love protects. Real love becomes softer when life gets hard. It does not become cruel. I started crying harder. Not just because Daddy was right, but because somewhere deep down, I'd known for years that something inside Brian had hardened. I just kept hoping love would fix it. The letter continued. I know this trust may seem extreme, but baby girl, I spent my whole life building security for you. Not so some man could arrive at the finish line and claim ownership over your future. This money belongs to you, not because you earned it, but because I earned it for you. My chest ached so badly I could barely breathe. I pictured Daddy working endless hours under Alabama heat, skipping vacations, repairing old boots instead of buying new ones. Every sacrifice had been for me, and even in death, he was still protecting me. Then I reached the final section of the letter, and everything changed. Do not tell Brian about the trust immediately. Let him reveal himself fully first. Greed always exposes itself eventually. A person pretending to love you cannot hide their true intentions forever once they think money is close enough to touch. Watch carefully, listen carefully, and when the truth becomes undeniable, walk away with your head high, knowing you did nothing wrong. I lowered the letter slowly. The office felt completely silent except for the sound of my breathing. Mr. Whitmore waited patiently before speaking. Your father loved you very much. I nodded through tears. He knew me better than I knew myself. Mr. Whitmore gave me a small, sad smile. Robert Mitchell was one of the most observant men I've ever met. I looked down at the trust papers again. How protected is this? Extremely. But Brian can challenge it, right? He can try. The calm confidence in Mr. Whitmore's voice caught my attention immediately. This trust was established well before your father became seriously ill, he explained. Every asset was legally transferred before any divorce discussions existed. The structure is airtight. So Brian gets nothing from your father's estate? He shook his head firmly. Not $1. A strange feeling moved through me then. Not happiness, not revenge. Relief. Pure relief. Like somebody had finally opened a locked door inside my chest. Because suddenly I understood something clearly. Brian didn't leave me because my father died. He left because he thought my father's death would benefit him. And Daddy made sure it wouldn't. Mr. Whitmore leaned forward slightly. There's one more thing your father instructed me to tell you. I looked up. If Brian suddenly becomes kinder once he believes money is involved, pay attention. A cold chill moved through me. Because Brian already had. The flowers, the soft voice, the sudden calmness. It wasn't reconciliation. It was a calculation. Daddy knew that too. What do I do now? I whispered. Mr. Whitmore folded his hands carefully. Right now? He paused. Right now, we let your husband think he's winning. I sat in my car outside my house for nearly 10 minutes before going inside. My hands still gripped Daddy's letter. Opportunity instead of treasure. The words kept replaying in my head over and over. By the time I finally opened the front door, I already knew one thing for certain. Brian was about to show me every ugly part of himself, and I was going to let him. The television was on when I walked in. Brian sat on the couch scrolling through his phone like nothing had happened between us, like he hadn't asked for divorce less than a week after my father died. He looked up immediately when he saw me. There you are, he said casually. How'd it go with the lawyer? I forced myself to stay calm. This was the performance now. The estate is bigger than I thought, I said carefully. I watched his eyes sharpen instantly. How much bigger? I set my purse down slowly. About 2 million. The silence that followed lasted maybe 2 seconds, but it told me everything. Because before he could stop himself, Brian smiled. Not a comforting smile, not a shocked smile, a hungry one.
He recovered quickly after realizing I noticed.
Wow, he breathed. Your dad really did well for himself. For himself. Not for me, not for family, for himself. I sat across from him quietly. The lawyer said probate might take a little while, I continued, but eventually everything transfers over. Brian leaned back slowly, trying too hard to look relaxed. That's life changing money. There it was. Not, I'm sorry you lost your father. Not, how are you holding up? Money. Always money. I nodded slowly. Yeah. He stared at the floor for a second before speaking again. Look, maybe we should slow down with the divorce stuff. I almost laughed. The audacity of it nearly took my breath away. Slow down? Yeah. He rubbed his hands together nervously. I mean, emotions are high right now. Your dad just passed. Maybe we rush things. Rush things. He served me divorce papers 4 days after Daddy died. Now suddenly he wanted patience. I lowered my eyes like I was thinking carefully. What are you saying exactly? Brian stood up and walked closer. I'm saying maybe we will work through this. We've been together 15 years, Angela. That has to mean something. The fake softness in his voice made my skin crawl, because now I could hear it clearly. Manipulation. Calculated manipulation. He sat beside me on the couch. I know I handle things badly, he said quietly. But I've been stressed too. Stressed. My father died, and he was stressed. I forced myself not to react. What changed your mind? He reached for my hand carefully, and for the first time in years, the touch felt completely empty. I remembered I love you. Lie. Every instinct inside me screamed it immediately, but I kept my face neutral. You already filed. We can stop it. It's not that simple. It can be. His thumb rubbed against my hand gently, and suddenly I understood something terrifying. Brian thought this was working. He genuinely believed I was falling for it, because he believed I was weak, emotional, too heartbroken to think clearly. Exactly the way Daddy predicted. I just think, Brian continued softly, your dad wouldn't want us throwing away 15 years together. That sentence hit me like a slap. Don't use my father. Don't you dare use him. But I swallowed the anger down because I needed him talking. I needed him to be comfortable. Needed him exposing himself completely. So instead, I asked quietly, what about all the things you said? He sighed dramatically. I was angry. At me? At the situation. What situation? Brian hesitated slightly, and then the truth slipped out before he could stop it. Feeling stuck. There it was again. That resentment. That dissatisfaction Daddy noticed years ago. You felt stuck with me? No, not with you exactly. He started backtracking immediately, but it was too late. With our life, he corrected. The bills, the pressure, watching everybody else move ahead while we struggled. We struggled. My chest tightened. Daddy helped us with rent twice, paid Brian's overdue truck note once. even helped cover surgery after Brian lost his job. And this man still felt cheated by life. I pulled my hand away slowly. What happens now? Brian's eyes flickered carefully. Well, honestly, there it was again, that careful tone, like he'd rehearsed this already. I think we should start planning smarter. Smarter how? Investments, property, financial growth, not grief, not healing. Growth, money, always money. Brian stood up and started pacing slowly. With that kind of inheritance, we could completely change our lives. We could move somewhere better, start businesses, buy rental properties. We. Interesting. He already saw the money as his. I thought you wanted a divorce. I was confused. No, you were greedy. There's a difference. I kept my expression soft and uncertain. What if I still want the divorce? That stopped him cold. For just a second, his mask slipped. I saw irritation flash across his face instantly before he covered it. You don't mean that. What if I do? He smiled again, but this time it looked forced. Angela, come on. Let's not make emotional decisions right now. Emotional. Funny how my emotions only became a problem once money entered the picture. I looked down quietly. What would happen financially if we stayed married? His eyes lit up immediately, too quickly. Well, eventually everything becomes shared anyway. Lie. I almost smiled thinking about Daddy's trust sitting safely beyond Brian's reach. But instead, I asked softly, so you think Daddy would have wanted us to stay together? Absolutely. Another lie. Daddy practically built a legal fortress to keep him away from me. Brian moved closer again. We can finally have the life we deserve. The life we deserve, not the life we built, not the life we loved, the life money could buy. I suddenly felt exhausted, completely exhausted, because for the first time in 15 years, I could see him clearly. Not the man I married, not the charming dreamer I defended for years, just a deeply unhappy man chasing money like it could fill whatever emptiness lived inside him. And realizing that hurt more than the divorce itself. I'm tired, I whispered. Brian nodded quickly. Of course, we'll talk tomorrow. We. Again, he kissed the top of my head before walking upstairs. The moment he disappeared, I grabbed my phone and immediately called Mr. Whitmore. He changed his mind, I whispered. The lawyer sounded completely unsurprised. Of course he did. He wants to stay married now because he believes staying married gives him access. I closed my eyes tightly. He's pretending to love me again. A long silence followed. Then Mr. Whitmore spoke gently. Angela, men motivated by greed often mistake performance for affection. They believe if they say the right words, they can control the outcome. I stared toward the staircase. I feel sick. That's because you're grieving two people at once, he said softly. My father, and the version of your husband you thought existed. That completely broke me because he was right. I wasn't just losing Brian. I was realizing I may never truly have him at all. Mr. Whitmore's voice turned serious again. Your father instructed me to tell you something else if Brian suddenly tried reconciliation. I wiped my face quickly. What? Be patient. I frowned. That's it? Yes. Why? Because eventually greed stops pretending. And deep down, I already knew he was right. Over the next 2 weeks, Brian became the husband I used to beg him to be. That was the cruelest part. Not because he changed, because now I knew it was all fake. He started bringing me coffee in the mornings again, started texting me during the day asking if I'd eaten, started touching my shoulder softly when he walked past me. Every gesture felt rehearsed, every smile felt calculated. And once you see manipulation clearly, you can never unsee it again. One evening, I came downstairs and found candles lit across the dining room table. Brian stood in the kitchen plating pasta. For a second, the scene almost looked normal, like the early years of our marriage, like before money hollowed him out. "What's all this?" I asked carefully. He smiled. "Date night. Date night. 3 weeks ago, this man told me our marriage was suffocating him. Now suddenly he was playing husband of the year." I sat slowly at the table. "You didn't have to do this." "I wanted to." "No, you wanted access. There's a difference." Brian poured wine into my glass before sitting across from me. "I've been thinking a lot," he said softly. "About us?" "About everything." I nodded quietly. He leaned forward. "You know, maybe this whole thing happened for a reason." That sentence alone made my stomach twist. What thing? The inheritance. There it was, always circling back to the money. Maybe your dad leaving you all that money is our chance to finally reset. Our chance, not my security, not my father's legacy. Our opportunity. I pushed pasta around my plate slowly. What exactly are we resetting? Our future. Brian's eyes lit up while he talked now, like he could already see the lifestyle in his head. The bigger house, traveling, investments, freedom. Freedom. Funny how he only believed freedom existed once money showed up. I stayed quiet, and silence always made Brian talk more. "I've actually been researching some opportunities." There it was, the next step. What kind of opportunities? He stood up quickly, almost excited. "Wait here." He disappeared upstairs and came back carrying a laptop and a stack of papers. I nearly smiled. Daddy was right again. Brian spread everything across the table dramatically. Charts, numbers, business proposals. "This," he said proudly, "is how we turn 2 million into 10." I stared at him quietly. "You've been planning this?" "For a while." "Of course you have." He sat beside me now instead of across from me, like proximity would create trust. "I know a guy from college," he explained. "He's launching a logistics company. Ground floor opportunity. Minimal risk, huge upside." Minimal risk. Every scam in history probably started with those words. "How much would it take?" Brian hesitated, then casually said, 200,000. I looked at him slowly. $200,000? It sounds like a lot, but Angela, listen to me. He grabbed the papers excitedly. This could change everything. I almost laughed. As if $2 million hadn't already changed everything. "You'd put in all the inheritance?" "Not all." He smiled quickly. "Just enough to build real wealth." I leaned back carefully. "And if it fails?" "It won't fail." "How do you know?" "Because Derek already has investors lined up." Derek. Interesting. I remembered Daddy's exact words in the letter. "He will eventually ask for money before the divorce is finalized. That is when you'll know." And now here we were, right on schedule. Brian lowered his voice softly. Look, I know things got ugly between us, but I'm trying to fix that. Fix that. Like emotional betrayal was a flat tire. I'm trying to build something with you again. I stared at him quietly. By asking me for $200,000, his jaw tightened slightly, just slightly, but I noticed. It's not asking, he corrected carefully. It's investing in our future. Our future. The same future he tried to walk away from before he knew about the will. I folded my hands together calmly. The money isn't available yet anyway. It will be soon. The speed of his response told me everything. He'd been thinking about this constantly, obsessing over it, calculating it. I just don't want you making emotional decisions with that kind of money, he continued. Emotional decisions. Interesting choice of words from the man who filed for divorce during a funeral week. I appreciate that, I said quietly. And Brian relaxed immediately because he thought he was winning again. I knew you'd understand. No, I finally understood. That's different. That night, after Brian fell asleep, I sat in my car outside and called Mr. Whitmore again. He asked for 200,000. The lawyer actually chuckled softly. Your father would not be surprised. He already has business plans ready. Of course he does. I rubbed my forehead tiredly. It's honestly scary how accurate Daddy was. Your father spent years observing him carefully, Mr. Whitmore said. People reveal themselves through patterns. I stared through the windshield at the dark street. I feel like I'm living with a stranger. No, he corrected gently. You're living with the truth. That sentence stayed with me because that's exactly what this was. Not transformation, revelation. Brian had always been this man. I just loved him too much to see it. Mr. Whitmore's tone shifted slightly. Did he pressure you aggressively? Not yet. He will. You're sure? Yes. The certainty in his voice made my chest tighten. Greed escalates, he continued calmly, especially when someone believes money is almost within reach. I swallowed hard. What do I do? Keep listening. That's it? For now. I frowned. That feels dangerous. Angela, your father didn't build this protection plan just to secure your inheritance. What do you mean? He wanted you to see Brian clearly enough that you would never go back. That hit harder than I expected. Because deep down, part of me still mourned the marriage. I still remember the early years, the laughter, the dreams, the man I thought existed. And Daddy knew that. He knew love makes people forget, makes people excuse, makes people return. So he designed this entire situation to remove all doubt forever. I closed my eyes tightly. He knew me that well. He was your father, Mr. Whitmore said softly. Of course he did. The next few days got worse. Brian stopped pretending slowly. Not completely, just enough for cracks to show. When I hesitated about the investment, he became impatient. When I said I wanted time, he became cold. And every conversation somehow returned to the inheritance. How long until probate finishes? Did the lawyer mention liquid assets? Will you keep the lake house?
Do you know how taxes work on inherited property? Question after question after question. Not once asking how I was sleeping. Not once asking if I missed my father. Not once asking if I was okay. One afternoon, I came home early from school and heard Brian talking in the kitchen. He didn't know I was there yet. Once the money clears, everything changes. I froze instantly. Brian laughed softly on the phone. No, man, way more than that. Closer to 2 million. My stomach dropped. He kept talking. Yeah, I'm working on it. She still feels guilty about the divorce stuff. Working it. I stood there completely numb. She'll come around, he continued confidently. Once we reinvest the money, we're set. Reinvest. Not her money. The money. Already in his mind. I backed away quietly before he could see me. Then I walked out the front door again, sat in my car, and cried so hard I couldn't breathe. Not because of the money, not even because of the betrayal, but because at that moment, every last illusion finally died. The man I loved did not exist anymore. Maybe he never had. The meeting was scheduled for Monday morning at 11 o'clock. Brian thought we were going to discuss reconciliation. That was the terrifying part. Even after everything, even after the divorce papers, even after the manipulation, he still believed he was smarter than everyone else in the room, especially me. By Sunday night, I could barely sleep. I kept replaying Daddy's voice in my head. Protect yourself. For years, I thought protection meant safety. Now I understood it also meant clarity. Sometimes love protects you by forcing you to see the truth. Monday morning, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror wearing the navy blue dress Daddy bought me for my 35th birthday. You need something powerful, he joked while handing me the box. I remember rolling my eyes at the time. Now standing there alone in the silence, I finally understood. This wasn't just a legal meeting. This was the end of an illusion. Brian came downstairs adjusting his tie. He looked confident, almost cheerful. You ready? He asked casually. I nodded once. Ready. The drive to Mr. Whitmore's office was painfully quiet. Brian kept checking his phone every few minutes, probably texting lawyers, or Derek, or whoever else he'd already promised pieces of my father's money to. The thought made my stomach twist. When we arrived, Mr. Whitmore's assistant escorted us into the conference room immediately. And that's when Brian's confidence grew even bigger, because sitting at the table was another attorney, a younger man in a gray suit with a leather briefcase. Brian smiled instantly. Angela, this is Greg Holloway. I hired him to help us structure everything fairly. Fairly. Always that word. Greg stood and shook my hand politely. Nice to meet you. I nodded quietly before sitting beside Mr. Whitmore. Brian sat across from me, looking completely comfortable. Too comfortable. Mr. Whitmore folded his hands calmly. Thank you all for coming. Greg opened a folder immediately. My client's primary concern, he began professionally, is ensuring equitable access to all marital assets moving forward. There it was, access. Not grief, not healing, access. Mr. Whitmore nodded once. And which assets specifically are we discussing? Greg adjusted his glasses. The inheritance from Mr. Robert Bennett's estate, valued at approximately $2.3 million. Brian looked proud hearing the number out loud, like he'd already earned it somehow. Greg continued, given that the inheritance entered the marriage prior to final dissolution proceedings, we believe there's substantial argument for shared marital interest. Mr. Whitmore stayed perfectly calm. I see. Brian leaned forward confidently. We're hoping to avoid a long court battle. Translation, give me money quickly. Mr. Whitmore opened a folder slowly. Well then, he said smoothly, this should simplify things considerably. Brian smiled. He genuinely thought that sentence meant good news for him. Mr. Whitmore slid a thick stack of documents across the table. Greg picked them up first, and within seconds, his entire expression changed. Confusion first, then concern, then something very close to panic. Brian noticed immediately. What? Greg kept flipping pages faster. What is this? Brian asked again. Mr. Whitmore answered calmly. This is the Bennett Family Irrevocable Protection Trust. The room went silent. Brian frowned. What? Mr. Whitmore folded his hands together. 6 months before his death, Robert Bennett transferred every major asset into a protected inheritance trust, solely benefiting his daughter. Greg looked pale now. Brian laughed nervously. Okay, and? And, Mr. Whitmore continued evenly, under the structure of this trust, none of those assets are considered marital property. The silence afterward felt enormous. Brian blinked slowly. No. Mr. Whitmore nodded once. Yes. No, that's not possible. It is entirely possible and entirely legal. Greg was already reading frantically. I watched sweat begin forming near Brian's temple. He can't do that, Brian snapped. He already did, Mr. Whitmore corrected calmly. Brian looked at me instantly. You knew about this. I held his stare quietly. Yes. His face changed completely. The softness disappeared. The fake affection disappeared. All that remained was rage. You knew this whole time? Yes. And you let me... He stopped himself. Too late. Too late. Mr. Whitmore spoke carefully. Let you what, Mr. Carter? Brian's jaw clenched hard. Greg finally looked up from the paperwork. Brian. Something in his attorney's voice made even my stomach tighten. This trust is airtight. No, it isn't. It is. No judge is going to let someone hide over $2 million from a spouse. Mr. Whitmore smiled slightly. Good thing nobody hid anything. He tapped the documents calmly. The trust was established long before divorce proceedings began, long before any formal separation. And Mr. Bennett documented every legal intention thoroughly. Brian stood up suddenly. This is insane. No, Mr. Whitmore said softly. This is preparation. Brian looked at me with pure fury now. Your father planned this? Yes. For how long? A while. His breathing got heavier. He thought I was after his money? The irony almost made me laugh. After everything Brian had done, he still wanted to sound offended. Mr. Whitmore opened another folder carefully. Actually, he said, Robert Bennett left written instructions explaining exactly why he created the trust. Brian froze. No. Oh, yes. Mr. Whitmore slid another paper forward. He specifically cited concerns regarding financial manipulation, opportunistic behavior, and instability within the marriage. Brian's face turned red instantly. That old man always hated me.
No, I said quietly. Everyone looked at me, and for the first time during the entire meeting, I felt completely calm. My father gave you chance after chance. Brian stared at me silently. He helped us financially. He defended you to family members. He welcomed you into his home. And you repaid him by trying to profit off his death. That's not true. It is exactly true. Brian pointed at me angrily. You trapped me. No, I said softly. You exposed yourself. That landed hard because deep down, he knew it was true. Greg cleared his throat awkwardly. Brian, realistically speaking, challenging this trust would be extremely expensive. Brian ignored him completely. You lied to me for weeks. I almost laughed. Weeks. This man lied to me emotionally for years. You filed for divorce 4 days after my father died, I replied calmly. Then suddenly wanted reconciliation once you heard the number attached to the will. Brian slammed his hand against the table. You think you're smarter than me now? No, I answered quietly. I just finally see you clearly. Silence. Heavy silence. Then Mr. Whitmore delivered the final blow. There is one additional matter. Brian looked exhausted now. What now? Per Robert Bennett's instructions, a separate legal fund was established specifically to protect Angela during any divorce proceedings initiated within 1 year of his death. Greg looked stunned again. What does that mean exactly? It means, Mr. Whitmore said calmly, Angela's legal expenses are fully covered regardless of duration. Brian's shoulders dropped slightly. For the first time, he looked scared, not angry, scared, because now reality was hitting him all at once. No inheritance, no leverage, no financial pressure, no control. You planned all this, he whispered to me. I shook my head slowly. My father did. Brian stared at the table for several long seconds, then finally muttered, I can't believe he did this to me. That sentence told me everything. Not, I can't believe I hurt you. Not, I can't believe our marriage ended. No, I can't believe he did this to me. Even now. Even here. Even after being exposed. Brian still saw himself as the victim. And suddenly, I didn't feel heartbreak anymore, just freedom. Brian didn't come home that night. Honestly, I was grateful. For the first time in weeks, the house felt quiet. Not peaceful yet, but quiet. There's a difference. I sat alone in the kitchen staring at Daddy's old coffee mug still sitting beside the sink. World's greatest dad. He used that mug every morning for almost 10 years. Suddenly, I started crying again. Not because of Brian, because Daddy was gone. That was the part people didn't understand. The betrayal hurt, but grief hollowed you out from the inside. And somehow, while surviving all this chaos, I still had to mourn my father too. My phone buzzed just after midnight. Brian. I stared at the screen for several seconds before answering. What?
You embarrassed me today.
No apology. No accountability. Just ego. I closed my eyes slowly. You embarrassed yourself. You blindsided me. You filed for divorce while my father was barely on the ground. Silence. Then a bitter laugh. So what? I made a mistake. A mistake. Like forgetting groceries. You tried to manipulate me out of my inheritance. You act like I was stealing from you. You were. No, Brian snapped. I was trying to secure our future. Our future. Still saying our. Even now. I suddenly felt exhausted all over again. There is no one anymore, Brian. His breathing sharpened instantly. You know what your problem is? I almost hung up right there, but something told me to keep listening. My problem? You've always thought you were better than me. I frowned. What are you talking about? You and your father. There it was. The resentment. Finally fully exposed. He never respected me. He helped you constantly because he thought I couldn't provide. The bitterness in his voice shocked me. Years. This anger had lived inside him for years. You have no idea what it feels like, Brian continued, walking into that house knowing he judged me every single time. Daddy judged behavior, not income. And deep down, Brian knew that too. He gave you opportunities, I said quietly. He treated me like charity. No, Daddy treated him like family. Brian just interpreted kindness as humiliation because his pride was louder than his gratitude. You know what? Brian continued coldly. Maybe your father wanted this divorce too. That sentence changed something inside me permanently because suddenly I wasn't sad anymore. I was done. Completely done. Do not talk about my father again. He controlled you your entire life. No, I replied calmly. He protected me.
Brian laughed bitterly.
Protect you from what? I let the silence answer for me. And I think that silence hurt him more than anything else could have. Because finally, he understood. Daddy saw him clearly years ago. And now I did too. Brian's voice lowered dangerously. You think you won. This was never a game. You took everything from me. I almost laughed at the insanity of that statement. He filed for divorce. He chased the inheritance. He destroyed the marriage. But somehow he was still the victim in his own mind. No, Brian, I said softly. You lost everything yourself. Then I hung up. The next morning, things got uglier. Much uglier. I arrived at school just before first period when the principal asked me to step into her office. Her expression looked uncomfortable. Angela, there's something I think you should see. My stomach tightened immediately. She turned her monitor toward me. Facebook. A public post from Brian. My hands went cold instantly. I tried to tell my side privately, but since lies are being spread about me, I need people to know the truth. I stopped breathing. The post continued. My wife and her father spent years making me feel small. I stood by her through everything, supported her emotionally, sacrificed for our marriage, and the second her father died and left money behind, they found a way to cut me out completely. I'm being financially abused and manipulated by wealthy people who think they're above everyone else. Hundreds of comments. Some are supportive. Some are confused. Some are cruel. I felt physically sick. He posted this last night, my principal said gently. Parents have already started calling. Humiliation burned through me instantly.
Not because strangers believed him, because I was already drowning emotionally, and now I had to defend my reputation too. I'm so sorry, she continued quietly. I nodded stiffly. I'll handle it. But honestly, I had no idea how. By lunchtime, the post had spread everywhere. Church members, old classmates, neighbors. People messaged asking if it was true, asking if I really tricked Brian out of the inheritance. Tricked him. Like my father protecting me was somehow immoral. I sat in my car during lunch break crying so hard I nearly got sick. Then my phone rang. Mr. Whitmore. He posted online, I whispered immediately. I know. You saw it? Yes. I waited for the panic in his voice, but instead he sounded calm, completely calm. Angela, listen carefully to me. I wiped my face quickly. This helps us. I blinked. What? He's angry, emotional, reckless, and now he's documenting his own behavior publicly. But people believe him. Some people will always believe the loudest story first, he said calmly. That doesn't make it true. I stared through my windshield silently. He's trying to shame you into emotional negotiation, Mr. Whitmore continued. That means he's desperate now. Desperate. The words settled heavily in my chest, because desperate people become dangerous. Maybe Mr. Whitmore sensed my fear because his voice softened slightly. You're safe. I don't feel safe. You will. I closed my eyes tightly. I just want this over. It almost is. But it wasn't over, not even close. 3 nights later, I woke up around 2 in the morning to glass shattering downstairs. For one frozen second, I thought I was dreaming. Then I heard footsteps. My entire body went cold. Someone was inside the house. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and dialed 911 immediately. The operator answered instantly. There's someone in my house, I whispered. Stay on the line with me. I locked my bedroom door quietly while my heart slammed against my ribs. Then I heard something downstairs crash violently. Another sound. Another, like furniture being thrown. The operator kept talking calmly, but I barely heard her, because suddenly I recognized the voice downstairs. Brian. Raging. You think you can ruin my life? Another crash. I started shaking uncontrollably. You think you're better than me? The operator heard him too. Police are on the way, she said quickly. Then came one final crash so loud it sounded like the entire living room exploded. And suddenly, silence. A few minutes later, police lights flooded through the windows. Officers found Brian in the backyard trying to leave through the side gate. Drunk, furious, completely out of control. He had smashed framed family photos, destroyed Daddy's office, thrown dishes across the kitchen, and spray painted one sentence across my living room wall. You away me. I stood there staring at those words while officers handcuffed my husband on the front lawn, and for the first time since Daddy died, I stopped feeling grief, stopped feeling heartbreak, stopped feeling guilt. Because watching Brian scream at police while neighbors stare from their porches, I finally understood something completely. Daddy didn't save me from losing money. He saved me from losing myself. Brian was charged with breaking and entering, destruction of property, and criminal intimidation. The restraining order was approved the same week. And just like that, the man I spent 15 years loving became someone legally forbidden from coming near me. Life changes fast when illusions finally die. The divorce moved quickly after the arrest, much quicker than Brian expected, because once his public meltdown happened, once the police reports became official, once the photos of my destroyed house entered court records, even his attorneys stopped fighting aggressively. There was no more pretending, no more performance, no more misunderstanding. The truth sat in black and white paperwork now, and truth is hard to manipulate once it becomes evidence. 3 months after the night Brian destroyed my home, we stood in court for the final hearing. I barely recognized him. He looked older, smaller, exhausted, like anger had eaten him alive from the inside. He avoided looking at me completely, which honestly felt fitting, because for most of our marriage, he never truly saw me anyway. The judge reviewed the settlement calmly. The house would be sold and divided according to marital law. Joint savings split equally. Personal assets retained individually. And the Bennett family trust remained entirely mine, protected, untouched, exactly as Daddy intended. Brian's attorney made one final weak attempt. Your Honor, my client still believes the trust unfairly excluded him from substantial marital opportunity. Opportunity. Interesting words. Not love, not marriage. Opportunity. The judge barely looked up. The trust was established legally and properly, she said firmly. This court has no basis to challenge it. That was it. Years of manipulation. Months of fighting, all collapsing in a single sentence. The judge signed the papers, and suddenly I was free. Actually free. Not just legally, emotionally, spiritually, completely. Outside the courthouse, Mr. Whitmore hugged me tightly. Your father would be proud of you. I started crying instantly, because after everything, that was still the sentence that mattered most. Not, you won. Not, you're rich. Not, you got revenge. No, your father would be proud of you. That was the victory. A week later, I finally returned fully to Daddy's house. Not to grieve this time, to rebuild. The spray paint was gone. The broken furniture was replaced. The shattered frames were repaired. But I left one thing untouched. Daddy's office. I sat there quietly one evening in his old leather chair, holding the final letter Mr. Whitmore gave me after the divorce was finalized. Daddy had written it months before he died. My beautiful Angela, if you're reading this, then you made it through the storm. And before anything else, I need you to understand something very clearly. None of this was your fault. You loved honestly. You trusted fully. You gave your marriage your whole heart. There is never shame in loving sincerely. The shame belongs to people who take advantage of love. Tears blurred the page immediately. I kept reading. I know this experience hurt you deeply, probably more deeply than I can imagine. But I need you to remember something your mother used to say. Pain reveals character, and now you know him. But more importantly, now you know yours too. You are stronger than you realize, kinder than this world deserves, and wiser than you believe. The money I left behind was never meant to define your life. It was meant to protect your freedom. Freedom to walk away from what harms you. Freedom to choose peace over performance. Freedom to build a beautiful life without fear. That word again, freedom. Not wealth, freedom. I pressed the letter against my chest and cried harder than I had cried in months. Not broken tears, healing tears, the kind that finally washed pain out instead of drowning you in it. And slowly, life began again. The following spring, I took my first real vacation alone. Savannah, Georgia. Daddy always wanted to visit but never found the time, so I went for both of us. I walked historic streets, ate ridiculous amounts of seafood, sat beside the water at sunset thinking about everything that changed. And for the first time in years, I felt peaceful inside my own mind. Not anxious, not performing, not trying to hold a marriage together by myself, just peaceful. A few months later, I created something called the Robert Bennett Scholarship Fund. Every year, it would help students from working class families attend college without crushing debt, because Daddy believed education changed lives. He used to tell me, if somebody opens a door for you, hold it open for somebody else too. So I did. At the first scholarship banquet, I stood in front of a crowded community center holding the microphone with trembling hands. And suddenly, I saw Daddy everywhere, in the students, in the families, in the hope of sitting inside that room. My father taught me something important, I said quietly. He taught me that real love protects people. It doesn't control them. It doesn't manipulate them. It protects their future even when they can't see the danger themselves. The room became completely silent. And sometimes I continued softly. The greatest act of love is making sure someone stays free. People cried. Honestly, so did I. 2 years after the divorce, my life looked completely different. I finished my master's degree, started mentoring younger teachers. I traveled more. Paris, Chicago, Ghana. Places I used to dream about while sitting beside Brian on our old couch listening to him complain about everybody else's success. Now I understand something important. Freedom feels quieter than fantasy. It's not flashy. It's not dramatic. It's waking up peacefully, sleeping peacefully, living without fear of becoming smaller to keep someone else comfortable. People ask sometimes if I hate Brian, and honestly, no. Hate requires emotional attachment. What I feel now is distance. Because eventually you realize some people enter your life to teach you what love is not. And once you learn the lesson, you let them go. I heard through mutual friends that Brian moved to another state eventually, remarried quickly, started another business that failed within a year. When people tell me updates, I usually just nod politely because that chapter feels like another lifetime now. The real love story here was never my marriage. It was my father, a man who worked 40 years, saved carefully, watched quietly, planned wisely, not because he worshiped money, because he loved his daughter enough to protect her future after he was gone. That's the part I carry with me every single day. Not the betrayal, the love. On the third anniversary of Daddy's death, I visited his grave early in the morning. I brought fresh flowers and sat beside the headstone while the sun came up slowly behind the trees. I'm okay now, I whispered. Actually, I was more than okay. I was whole again. I finally understand what you were trying to give me, I told him softly. Not money, not revenge, freedom. The wind moved gently through the cemetery trees, and for one brief second, I could almost hear his laugh. That deep, warm laugh that always made me feel safe. I miss you every day, I whispered. But I'm living now, Daddy. Really living. And maybe that was the greatest victory of all. Not winning the divorce, not protecting the inheritance, surviving the heartbreak without losing myself. Because in the end, Brian thought my father's death would make him rich. What he never understood was this: Daddy's final gift wasn't wealth, it was wisdom. The wisdom to see manipulation clearly, the wisdom to walk away from fake love, and the wisdom to understand that real love never tries to take from you. Real love protects you, even after goodbye. If this story touched your heart, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications for more powerful stories about love, betrayal, family, and resilience. And if you've ever had someone protect you, believe in you, or save you when you didn't even realize you needed saving, share your story in the comments. Your voice matters. Your story matters. And remember this: real love never destroys you. Real love protects you.